But I wanted to ask you, you mentioned some obviously bad to mediocre writers, if I am going to grant them mediocrity, but how can you think of any writer who succeeds at the big moments but doesn't really get the tiny moments interspersed in their work? So, say that they can write a great scene, but they don't know how to structure the book properly so that there's tiny moments giving hints to character. One of the names I would think of would be James Joyce. I think that he has some great scenes, but he is unable to structure a novel very properly.
Well, yeah, and I've said that many times before that Joyce, you could argue, is a great writer, but he's not in any way, shape, or form a great novelist. And you can see that in his 4 or 5 best short stories from Dubliners. His best work is The Dead, that long short story slash short novella. Um, Most of the writers who have greatness in the last 50 years, someone like a Charles Johnson or someone like a William Kennedy, uh, are capable of having the little moments, but they don't have, their books overall don't have the overall heft. When I think of something like Ironweed or Legs, some of the early great books by Kennedy, they have, there's maybe 5, 6, 7, 8 moments in each of those books that are sort of like those Luft moments, but they don't have the, I mean, it takes a mindset. You have to. We've talked before about the difference between being a visionary, creationary, and functionary mindset. Most of the prose writers that write, and most artists are incapable of being visionaries. A visionary isn't someone who just has an idea. Oh, I have this futuristic idea of a metropolis-like society, like Fritz Lang's movie. A vision is being able to immerse someone in your work so that it feels like your idea of reality is reality. That's difficult to do. In
Do you think vision only extends to the arts, or that it can? This is a question I have my own response, but do you think it only extends to the arts, or it can play in other pursuits as well?
Well, people have asked that, like, was Einstein a visionary? I don't know. I think vision, just as creativity flowers out of the functionary life, so does vision out of a creationary life. Scientists are not by nature creative individuals. They have little moments of creativity in service to discovery, but they are discovering piecemeal what reality is. Um, Isaac Asimov, for example, his Foundation trilogy, that world, that galaxy, that reality that he created there, while it's certainly not as complex as later works, uh, that came in science fiction in a certain sense, uh, he established something. The whole, you wouldn't have Star Wars without the Foundation trilogy. Not that I think Star Wars is all that great a shakes, but uh, there's certainly a vision there. The whole idea of psychohistory, of looking back on in from a greater time in the future at what is the past to that character, but is our future still, is a leap of logic that works. It's a conceit that works in that work. To say that, for example, Darwin was a visionary. No, Darwin worked very piecemeal. That's to misunderstand what the term vision really is. Um, that the Oppenheimer or those who worked on that atomic bomb, that they were visionaries. I mean, I'm loath to say that scientists can be visionaries. I think you can be a philosopher and have a vision. I think you can be certainly an artist as a visionary, but I'm not sure it extends to science. I could be wrong, but I don't think so.
And I think that idea of yours has kind of mutated throughout the times, because I've recalled you've stating that vision is seen further than the creationary, and
Yeah.
that would extend to Darwin and a few others. But obviously, with
Well, but I've
this
always I've
definition that you're
always
coming up
said,
with now, it doesn't exactly pertain to him, because he's not immersing you in a world. He's more or less just taking the world and summing it up in some sense.
yeah. Well, but I've always maintained that a vision is to have a worldview that change. I mean, I guess maybe you could say in that sense Darwin and evolution, but again, it wasn't just Darwin alone. There was Wallace and a few other
It was
people. But
Wallace.
but the idea of evolution you could say was visionary. So I'll grant you Darwin more so than an Einstein. Uh, you know, you could say, for example, but even so, the reason that I'm more loath to say Darwin was a visionary than say you could argue Melville is because other people could have done what Darwin did, and other people did do what Darwin did. Melville, good or bad, stands alone as the ultimate Melville. Darwin is, you could argue, maybe a hyper Wallace, or Wallace was an infra Darwin. They were on the same track, but Darwin understood a little bit more deeply than Wallace and was a little bit more persistent and was a little bit more tenacious. And that's why we know Darwin 90%. When people think of discoverers of evolution, 90% will think just Darwin alone. 10% of people have said, oh, yeah, and Wallace too.
Not to mention the hundreds of years of hints that led those two men to eventually gather that idea. Wallace isn't given enough credit in most circles. They always ascribe Darwin, but Wallace came up with the idea. Darwin was able to actually give it a name and discern exactly the inner workings of it.
Well, also Wallace later in his life became more religious, and he veered away from hard science. He became more invested, I think, in spiritualism. So his later uh, personal demons or lunacy hurt him.
I think that's just a case of taking an opinion and just ascribing it to the gods or whatnot instead of thinking independently for yourself when they don't give enough credit to Wallace and give it all to Darwin. They have for decades now.